Right. So warm greetings to all of you colleagues. My name is Mr. Privilege, and I'm the tutor here at GradQuest Consulting, and I will be the one that will be helping you guys in regards to the preparation for your upcoming exam in AUI 3702 um, for this October-November 2025 academic year. Right. So obviously, GradQuest is a separate, or rather, it's an independent tutorial institution altogether. And so what we do is we provide tutorial classes to help you guys understand the content of your modules in a more comprehensive manner. And also, I think in an approach or a manner that is simpler for you to follow to get you in a position where you are capacitated to, to respond to the exam questions as they come. So without any further ado, there are some few documents I just want to open here briefly, just so that I can give an overview regarding to the module and how we are going to operate as far as exam preparation is concerned. So obviously, the approach or the idea behind this kind of engagement that we are going to be um, engaging in. It's different from your normal weekly classes, where, for instance, I'm just basically teaching you guys, um, the content of the module, and to a certain extent, we can even go about discussing the assignment, especially the written assignments in particular. But as far as this particular type of classes are concerned, these ones are geared to get you guys fit for the exams. So you'll notice that we'll focus more on past assignment questions. We'll focus more on past examination questions as well, just so that you are in a better position to get a pass. Because this is one of the difficult or rather challenging modules for many of you. I've come across students in times past that would tell me, look, I've been doing this module now, it's for the third time, and I've been repeating the module. I just can't seem to figure where am I going wrong, and many have passed through my hands and they've did exceptionally well. There will be testimonials that I will share with you guys at the end of the class, just so that you can gain a perspective regarding to the kind of delivery in terms of services that we offer, right? So without any further ado, let me quickly open that document so that we can get started. Right. It's going to open just now. Just bear with me. Sometimes my laptop device might be a bit slow, but eventually the document would open. Go. All right. It should be able to open now. All right. So I just want to quickly move on to this particular part of the module outline. So what I've picked, especially when it comes to AUI 3702, usually the type of questions that you would get in the exam, right? They are more centered on business cycles. So when you're talking about business cycles, colleagues, and yes, of course, we'll talk about the various topics and all. There are some changes here and there that has transpired to the topics that you see here, but uh, the heart of the module still remains business cycles, right? So when you're talking about business cycles, essentially we are referring to the likes of your inventory and production cycle. We're talking about acquisitions and payment cycle, which is also commonly known as the purchases and payment cycle, which is the notes document that I've shared with you guys earlier on during the day. All right. So this is one of the business cycles of note as far as AUI 3702 is concerned. Right. Then, of course, you have a revenue and receipt cycle, which primarily deals with the process by which the company generates its revenue, which could be either as a result of them selling a product to their client or to their consumers, or it could be as a result of selling a service to their consumer or to their clients in essence. But ideally, with revenue and receipt, it's all about the process followed to create revenue for the company, right? And then another important cycle of note is the payroll and personnel cycle, also commonly known as the human resources and payroll cycle. So obviously, you discover that the title differences, but or rather, let me say the synonyms in terms of the titles. I've given them in that sense because there are two different sources of materials that I use, especially with regards to business cycles. So number one, it's obviously your prescribed textbook, which is that orange textbook, which is internal audit perspective. I mean, sorry, internal performing of internal audit engagements textbook, the orange textbook in color, is the one that obviously deals with all these various types of business cycles. Then, of course, there's something called bank and finance cycle, but they don't heavily test regarding to this particular cycle. The cycles which I have come to discover to be of essence in the exams, even in the assignments themselves, it's usually the first four that I've outlined, which is inventory and production, purchases and payment, revenue and receipt cycle, as well as human resources and payroll cycles. Those ones, I can assure you for the fact that if you open any question paper of your choice, be it even the one that was written last semester or any other semesters prior to that, you will discover that there is always something to do with the business cycles that is tested. So now, given this as your foundational base, what then comes to mind as a student should be, what exactly is it that I need to know as far as these business cycles are concerned, so that I can be in a position to respond what the examiner expects of me. So now that takes us to what we call assumed knowledge and examinable items. So with the assumed knowledge and examinable items, these are commonly tested assumed knowledge elements. In other words, these are things that you know for a fact if you go into an examination paper or even any form of past assignment of your choice, you are likely going to find an element to do with that. What are those things really? And of course, most of them that you see that I've outlined from number 1 to number 8, they are all directly linked rather, to the business cycle concept. So as far as business cycles is concerned, one thing for sure that you should be able to know, you should know the stages or phases in each one of those respective cycles. So if I look at a business cycle, all right, a cycle is basically a process or a series of steps in sequencing to articulate a certain decisive, or let me just say an assured objective end. So it means that if I look at a business cycle, there is somewhere where it begins and there's somewhere where it has to produce an output, right? So the series of steps that take place, you should be able to know them, right? And that can also be articulated as functions in the cycle. It can also be articulated as stages, of course, which I've already mentioned. But at the same time, if you then go into the actual case studies or what I would call system descriptions in the exam, you're going to be able to pick them up actually. As you go through each one of those respective scenarios in the exam, you'll be able to tell that, oh, okay, so as far as this particular scenario is concerned, this has to do with the ordering function. Maybe it is the
Mm.
payment function that you're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Please just kindly mute yourself if you've got background noises coming. Thank you. All right. So now, so I was explaining that if you go through a system, I mean, if you go through a case study in any question paper you can think of, right? You can be able to pinpoint these phases, these stages, these functions in any particular cycle of knot, which can be which could be dealt with in a situation of in a setup of an examination. I'm going to illustrate with this October November 2023 question paper that I've already shared with you, so you can be able to see these things. But ideally, in the context of an exam, what I'm just trying to make sure that you understand is that you see them as system descriptions. So a system description, basically, it's just a narrative of how the company is carrying out certain functions of the cycle in their business processes. So, for instance, if you go into this particular October November 2023 question paper, let me just clear some few things here. So if you look into this particular question paper, right? Let me illustrate with question 1, for example. So you discover, yes, they are requesting you to compile with reference to the purchases system for audit engagement for audit engagement objectives. And then, of course, they also wanted you to identify weaknesses, potential effect, and recommendations. It's part and parcel of the elements that we're going to talk about here. All right. And so all of these, trust me, if you go into any question paper of your choice, you are going to find anything to do with that. As far as a business cycle is concerned, you will definitely be required to identify weaknesses in the system description. They might also potentially require you to identify risks in the system description and to give recommendations as well. So now, one thing that is very also important, which I should put across now, is that as far as questions on weaknesses, risks, and recommendations is concerned, it can come in this manner. It can be a question where I'm going to try to use different colors here so that you can be able to see this. So if it's a question about weaknesses, risks, and recommendations, it can be a case where in one column, they want you to identify a weakness. In the other column, they want you to give the risk description. And then maybe sometimes, which is the case with the October, November question paper, they would want you to give a recommendation, which is aimed at addressing one of the two. But primarily, it will be aimed at addressing the root cause of the problem, which is the weakness. All right. So normally when you get a question like this, where there's 3 things they want you to address, which is weaknesses, and then maybe the effect, or which is the risk in actual fact, all right, your recommendation should always be directed at addressing the weakness. Why am I saying that it should be it should be directed at addressing the weakness other than the risk? Is because if you only address the risk, you're not necessarily addressing the problem. Because for the risk to occur, something should have actually triggered the risk to occur. So like for instance, if you are to encounter an external threat, okay? If you are to encounter an external threat can only occur if ever there is a trigger of it, which can be in form of what I would call red flags, which can be in form of what we call control deficiencies. Okay, let me just try to switch to the whiteboard screen so that I can show you these things properly. And then I'll come back to this presentation. I think it will make more sense that way. Why I want to do that is because I want you guys to be able to see the differences between a weakness, a risk, of course, and then a recommendation. But the recommendation, it's very easy to differentiate or to distinguish it from the weakness and the risk. But then where the tricky part comes, and which is one thing that a lot of students encounter a challenge on, is to disseminate the differences between a weakness and a risk. Now, the two colleagues are not the same. I'm talking about a weakness and the risk. Those two things are completely different. So now the question is, how do they differ? So I just want to address that briefly before we go to that question, because obviously we have to discuss the details of it. So now, if you are to evaluate a weakness versus a risk, here's how these two differ. As far as a weakness is concerned, if they ask you in a question to identify a weakness, here's what they're looking for. Number one, they're looking for missing controls. In other words, conditions in the scenario or in the system description that reflects missing controls. That's number one. Number two, conditions in the scenario that suggest that the way the company is doing things is inappropriate. So these are inadequate controls. All right. Which is also the same thing as control deficiencies. Control deficiencies. All right. So these are the two primary point of departure as far as weakness identification is concerned. So as you go through a system description or a case study in the context of an exam, you are looking for a condition which suggests that there are controls that are supposed to be in place in paragraph A or maybe in paragraph 1, whatever the case might be. But those controls are not in place. If you identify a condition like that, that would be attributed as a weakness. And there's a way in which they want you to write those, of course, which we'll talk about later. And then number two, inadequate controls. So as you go through the scenario, you'll be able to pick up that, okay, they would tell you, for instance, that there's a security personnel who is present at the entry and exit point to the warehouse section, but often after every 30 minutes interval, he leaves the entrance or exit point unattended to attend to his personal matters. Now, do we have a control measure in place, which is, in this case, a physical control? Yes, we do. But then is it achieving the intended purpose that we expect of it? No, it's not. Because if this individual leaves the warehouse section entrance and exit point unattended, it's going to give room to the undesired outcomes, which in this case would be in form of theft or unauthorized entry or unauthorized access to the warehouse area, resulting, of course, in what? In theft of inventory items. So a risk now, it then, if ever we have a condition where they are missing controls, or we have a condition where the controls are in place, but they are not achieving the intended purpose. In other words, they are inadequate, or they're basically, there's control deficiency that we can see in how the company is doing things. That then gives an opening to undesired outcomes. In other words, it gives an opening to risks. So risks can be therefore defined as undesired outcomes. Risks can also be defined as what could potentially go wrong. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. All right. So what could potentially go wrong if you don't have the relevant controls? In other words, if they are missing controls, which are supposed to be there, and those controls are not in place, what could then potentially go wrong in the company? All right, if you have a security personnel that is often leaving the warehouse section unattended, what could potentially go wrong under those circumstances? That's a risk now. You see, so as you explain a risk, there are two things here, especially when I think let me explain that one later. But for now, what I just want you guys to pick up is the differences between a weakness and the risk. So what starts first before you can even talk about risks? What takes place first is weaknesses. All right. And which another synonym to weaknesses, it's let me just put this in a different color. It's red flags. All right. Another synonym to weakness, which sometimes you can find in the exam, they might talk of control deficiencies. They might also refer them as gaps in the system. All right? So all of those are attributable to as weaknesses. So red flags, something that just basically gives an indication that something might potentially go wrong or something is just not being done right. There's deviation from policies, there's violation, or there's misconduct that is taking place in the company. When you see things like that, that is what we call a weakness, or that is what we can regard as a weakness. Now, if that is not addressed, it then gives birth to danger, which is what we call a risk. So definitely a risk is an undesired outcome, and it's something that could potentially go wrong, or ultimately we can regard to this as um, the ultimate consequence or the resulting effect, as it were, of this. So if this is not addressed, if a weakness is not addressed, what is the resulting effect of that? That's what a risk is in simple terms. So colleagues, that is the primary key differences between a weakness and a risk in simple terms. So what transpires first is this. And again, let me just add something very important whilst I'm on this. Um, Again, another thing that you need to observe with a weakness, it's also what we can really consider as a root cause. All right. It's also something that we can consider as a root cause. A risk, on the other end, it's basically the effect. I hope it's ringing some bells when you're talking about an audit finding. Okay, so obviously there's if you are to draft an audit finding in practice, right? There are 5 elements to it. There has to be a criteria, there has to be a condition, there has to be a cause to the problem, which is of course the root cause. And then that root cause, if it is not addressed, it will give birth to the negative effect, which is what we call risks. And then what considers us to be of value to a company is when we give solutions. That's where recommendations fit into the picture. So when you talk of recommendations, here's what I want you to observe. There's no one particular formula when it comes to recommendations, but then as you give your recommendations let me just say, when you give control solutions to management or to the board, make sure that your recommendation is realistic. Make sure that your recommendation is practical, meaning to say something that they can literally be able to implement even without your presence. So you give them as a suggestion, say, guys, this is what you need to do to solve this particular problem. So you need to, to do 1, 2, 3 in order for you to come out of the problem that you currently have. And then you move away as an auditor. Suppose maybe you are basically an audit firm and you're just, giving these recommendations in form of an audit to a client. So after you've given your recommendations, obviously you won't be present to help them implement their solution. Okay, I'm seeing a hand. Temba, please go ahead.
Um, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to find out how we formulate an answer, especially when it comes to recommendations. Like, how do we structure our answer in terms of auditing
The audit language.
link language? Yes, sir.
Okay, not a problem. I'm getting to that. I'm getting to
Thank you,
that
sir.
just about now. So here's
All
the
right.
catch. So what they use, which I've picked to, to be, I wouldn't want to call it a formula as such, but then it's something that they check. Number one, when they assess your recommendation statement, they want to check whether it's realistic. Number one, they want to check whether it's something that is feasible or something that is practical for management to implement. All right. Now, all of these things I'm giving you, this is from a perspective of when the lecturer is marking. These are the things they check for. The recommendation that you're giving, is it making sense? Is it something that if you are to give that as an instruction to someone who is not an auditor, they can be able to make sense of what you are saying, and they can be able to link it to their objectives to say, look, but if we follow the recommendation that auditor A has given to us, it's going to help us to reach our target. You understand? So let me give you an example with a case where you have a company maybe that is a warehouse. I'm just going to use the warehouse again. So maybe they have a warehouse area, and the security personnel constantly leaves the warehouse section unattended after every 30 minutes interval. What would you recommend as a solution to management to address that problem? Because in that case, notice you have the security guard, physical controls are there, right? In form of a security personnel. But this individual often leaves this place unattended after every 30 minutes. It follows to me that there is no any other alternative control measure that we have in place to give us the assurance that, look, the warehouse is properly safeguarded. So what are the other solutions that you can recommend to management? This is a question I'm posing to you guys. I want you just to think out of the box a little bit. I already have CS some points I can give, but I just want to see your thinking. What would you recommend? And it has to be realistic